They say love is supposed to feel like coming home. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes home is the place that burns you alive from the inside out, leaving nothing but ash and the bitter taste of what could have been. I learned this truth on the night of the blood moon, when Alpha Kale chose another as his Luna and my world shattered like glass beneath a wolf's claw. The marking ceremony should have been my triumph, the culmination of years of heated glances and whispered promises. Instead, I watched from the shadows as he bit into Lydia's throat, sealing a bond that was supposed to be mine. The pain wasn't just emotional. It was physical, primal, like something fundamental inside me was being torn apart. My wolf, usually a constant presence humming beneath my skin, went silent. Not the peaceful quiet of sleep, but the terrifying stillness of death. That's when I ran. Deep into the forbidden forest where pack law said no wolf should venture alone. Where ancient things slept and shadows moved with purpose. I collapsed against a gnarled oak, bleeding from wounds I couldn't remember getting, my rejection so complete it seemed to poison the very air around me. And that's when I felt them. Eyes like burning coals, watching from the darkness with an interest that was both predatory and protective. Something had awakened in response to my pain, drawn by the scent of a broken wolf whose very brokenness might be the key to unimaginable power. 3 days. That's how long it had been since my world ended, and already the pack had moved on as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't bled my heart out on the forest floor while Alpha Kale claimed another as his Luna. I stood in the doorway of the pack's apothecary, my sanctuary turned prison, watching the morning bustle of pack life continue without missing a beat. Children laughed as they chased each other between the wooden cottages. Warriors sparred in the training grounds, their grunts of exertion carrying on the crisp autumn air. And there, near the ceremonial circle where my dreams had died, workers were already dismantling the marking platform, erasing the evidence of my humiliation with efficient thoroughness. My reflection in the apothecary's window showed a stranger. The vibrant girl who had believed herself destined for greatness was gone, replaced by someone hollow-eyed and pale. But it was the scratches that truly frightened me. Deep, angry welts crisscrossed my arms and neck, wounds that should have healed within hours for any werewolf. Instead, they remained raw and weeping, defying every natural law I understood about our kind. I touched one gently, wincing at the sharp sting. In the 3 days since the ceremony, my enhanced healing had simply stopped working. Not slowed, not weakened, but ceased entirely, as if my wolf had retreated so far inside me that she'd taken all her gifts with her. The bell above the shop door chimed, and Elena Blackthorne stepped inside. Pack's head healer was a woman of 60 with silver-streaked hair and knowing eyes that had seen too much. She took one look at my wounds and clicked her tongue in disapproval. "Those are getting worse, child," she said, setting her basket of herbs on the worn wooden counter. "Have you tried shifting? Sometimes the wolf form can heal what the human cannot." I almost laughed, but the sound that emerged was more like a broken sob. "I can't shift, Elena. I can't even feel her anymore." Elena's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "The rejection was hard on you, yes, but wolves are resilient. Your animal will return when she's ready." But that was the lie everyone told themselves, wasn't it? That this was temporary, that I would heal and move on and find my place again. None of them understood that something fundamental had broken inside me that night. The bond I'd never had with Kale had somehow still managed to snap when he chose Lydia, taking parts of me I didn't even know existed. By midday, the whispers had grown bold enough that I heard Sarah Whitmore tell her daughter to stay away from me, just in case whatever was wrong with me was contagious. The little girl, barely 6 years old, had looked at me with the same fearful curiosity she might show a rabid animal. That evening, as I walked the short path from the apothecary to my cottage on the outskirts of Pack territory, I noticed them. Symbols carved deep into the bark of the ancient oaks that lined the forest edge. They were crude but deliberate, slashed into the wood with something sharp enough to cut through bark like butter. I approached the nearest tree, my heart hammering as I traced the strange markings with one finger. They were unlike any pack runes I knew, angular and harsh where our traditional symbols were flowing and organic. and they seemed to pulse with their own dark energy, making my wounded skin tingle with recognition. More trees bore the same marks, forming a rough circle around my property. Someone or something had marked my territory while I slept. But whether it was a warning or a claim, I couldn't tell. Inside my cottage, I lit every candle I owned and pulled out my grandmother's old journals, searching for any reference to symbols like the ones I'd found. My grandmother had been the pack's lore keeper before Elena, a woman who knew more about the old ways than anyone alive. But as I flipped through pages of careful handwriting documenting pack history and herbal remedies, I found nothing that matched what I'd seen. It was only when I reached the very back of the oldest journal that I found a loose page, yellowed with age and covered in her familiar script. The heading made my blood run cold: Shadow Wolves and the Curse of Dual Nature. Text described a bloodline thought extinct, wolves who carried the taint of vampire magic in their veins. They were said to be neither fully wolf nor fully supernatural, existing in a liminal space that made them powerful but unstable. Page spoke of rejection triggering their awakening, of wounds that wouldn't heal because their wolf fought against their emerging vampire nature. And at the bottom, in my grandmother's careful handwriting, were the same symbols I'd found carved into the trees. My hands shook as I set the page aside. It was impossible. Shadow wolves were legend, stories told to frighten children. But as I looked at the wounds on my arms, at the way they seemed to throb in rhythm with some unseen pulse, I couldn't deny the terrible possibility that my rejection had awakened something in me that should have stayed buried. Sighed, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of my cottage. And in that sound, I could have sworn I heard something else. A howl, low and mournful, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound I'd never heard before, yet it called to something deep inside me, something that had been stirring in the darkness since the night my heart broke. The supply run to Millbrook was supposed to be routine. Elena needed wolfsbane and silver nettle from the human herbalist, ingredients too delicate to grow in our mountain soil. I volunteered for the task, desperate for any excuse to leave pack territory and the suffocating weight of pitying stares. Town sat in the valley below our mountain stronghold, a cluster of brick buildings and winding streets where humans lived their blissfully simple lives. No pack politics, no mate bonds, no mysterious wounds that defied healing. Just ordinary people going about ordinary business. I parked the old pickup truck outside Henderson's Herbal Remedies and breathed in the scent of civilization. Car exhaust, coffee from the diner across the street, and the faint perfume of late-blooming roses from someone's garden. No forest loam, no territorial markers, no constant reminder of what I'd lost. Margaret Henderson, the elderly herbalist who had been selling supplies to our pack for decades, greeted me with her usual warm smile. She was one of the few humans who knew about our true nature and kept our secrets. "Sarah, dear, you look tired," she said, studying my face with concerned eyes. "Are you eating enough? Your grandmother always said proper nutrition was half the battle when it came to healing." I managed a weak smile, gathering the carefully wrapped bundles of herbs. "Just a rough patch, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for these." She pressed a small vial of something golden into my hands. "Calendula oil. For those scratches. Sometimes the old remedies work better than the new ones." The walk back to the truck should have been peaceful. The afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of amber and gold, and the air carried the promise of winter's first snow. But as I loaded the supplies into the bed of the pickup, the hair on the back of my neck began to prickle. Someone was watching me. I turned slowly, scanning the street. A few humans went about their business, none paying me any attention. But the feeling persisted, that primal awareness that spoke of predator and prey. My broken wolf might not be able to shift, but some instincts ran deeper than magic. The sensation followed me as I drove out of town, taking the winding mountain road that led back to pack territory. It wasn't until I reached the stretch of forest road where cell service died and civilization felt like a distant memory that I saw him. A massive black wolf stood in the center of the road, forcing me to slam on the brakes. Truck skidded to a stop just feet from the creature, close enough that I could see the silver markings that decorated his dark fur like lightning across a midnight sky. He was enormous, easily twice the size of any wolf in our pack. But it wasn't his size that made my breath catch in my throat. It was his eyes. Instead of the warm gold that marked a healthy werewolf, his eyes gleamed with flecks of deep red like garnets catching firelight. We stared at each other through the windshield, and I felt something stir deep inside me. Not my wolf, she remained stubbornly silent, but something else. Something that recognized him on a level that bypassed conscious thought. He didn't move as I slowly opened the truck door and stepped out onto the asphalt. The afternoon air carried his scent, pine and cedar and something darker, something that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. "You're blocking the road," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The wolf tilted his massive head, studying me with an intelligence that was distinctly human. Then, without warning, he threw back his head and howled. The sound echoed off the mountain walls, wild and haunting and utterly unlike any pack song I'd ever heard. That's when I heard the engines. 3 motorcycles came around the bend behind me, their riders wearing the leather and denim that marked them as the kind of humans who brought trouble wherever they went. Hunters, I realized with a spike of fear. Kind who came to the mountains looking for wolves to kill and trophies to claim. "Well, well," called the lead rider as he pulled off his helmet, revealing a scarred face and cold eyes. "Looks like we got ourselves a 2-for-1 deal, boys." The black wolf's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, but he made no move to flee. Instead, he positioned himself between me and the approaching men, his massive frame radiating lethal intent. "That's a big one, Jake," said the second hunter, dismounting from his bike with a rifle in his hands. "Probably worth good money to the right buyer." "And the girl's not bad either," added the third, his grin revealing teeth yellowed by tobacco. "Shame to waste her." Terror flooded my system, but my wolf remained unreachable. Without her strength, her speed, her healing, I was as helpless as any human. The hunters spread out, surrounding us with practiced efficiency. "Easy now, sweetheart," Jake said, pulling a pistol from his jacket. "You just stay real still while we handle your furry friend here." The black wolf's growl was a sound from nightmares, low and rumbling and filled with promise of violence. But even he couldn't take on 3 armed men alone. That's when everything changed. The wolf began to shift, but not in any way I'd ever seen before. Instead of the painful, drawn-out process that marked most transformations, his change was fluid, graceful, like watching smoke reshape itself. One moment he was pure animal, the next he stood in human form, naked and magnificent and terrifying. He was tall, perhaps 6'4", with the lean muscle of a predator and skin pale as moonlight. His hair was black as his wolf's fur, falling in waves to his shoulders, and those same unsettling red-flecked eyes now blazed with fury in a face that could have been carved by angels or demons. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't place, something old and European and dangerous. "I believe you've made a mistake." Jake recovered first, swinging his pistol toward the stranger. "What the hell? How did you?" He never finished the question. The man moved with speed that defied human understanding, crossing the distance between them in the space between heartbeats. His hand closed around Jake's throat, lifting him off the ground with effortless strength. "The mistake," he continued conversationally as Jake's feet kicked uselessly in the air, "was thinking you could threaten what is mine." The other 2 hunters opened fire, but the stranger was already moving. He released Jake, who crumpled to the asphalt gasping for air and flowed between the bullets like water. His hand struck the second hunter's chest with a wet thud, and the man flew backward into the trees with a scream that cut off abruptly. The third hunter, the one with the yellowed teeth, turned to run. He made it perhaps 10 feet before the stranger caught him, one hand tangling in his greasy hair. There was a sharp crack, and the man went limp. Silence settled over the forest road like a burial shroud. Jake lay motionless where he'd fallen, and the other 2 hunters were nowhere to be seen. The stranger stood in the center of the carnage, completely calm, as if casual murder was just another part of his afternoon routine. He turned to me then, and I saw that his eyes were no longer flecked with red. They were solid crimson now, burning like coals in his pale face. "Little wolf," he said, and his voice was gentler now, almost tender. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. My mind struggled to process what I'd just witnessed. The speed, the strength, the casual brutality of it all. This was no ordinary shifter. "God," he said, and the red began to fade from his eyes, leaving them a more normal dark brown with just hints of that unsettling crimson. "I am sorry you had to see that. Humans who hunt our kind rarely respond to civilized discourse." "What are you?" I whispered. He smiled then, and I caught a glimpse of elongated canines. "I am Damon Blackthorn. And you, Sarah Nightshade, are in far more danger than you realize." My blood turned to ice. "How do you know my name?" "I have been watching your bloodline for some time," he said, taking a step closer. I should have been terrified, should have run screaming into the forest. Instead, I found myself rooted to the spot, captivated by his presence, waiting for the shadow wolf gene to finally resurface. Shadow wolf. The term from my grandmother's journal made my wounds throb with recognition. "Your rejection 3 nights ago awakened something that has slept in your family's blood for generations," he explained, his voice dropping to a hypnotic murmur. "Something your pack should have left undisturbed." The scent of pine and something darker wrapped around me like invisible chains. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to demand explanations for the impossible things I'd witnessed. But my throat felt thick, my thoughts sluggish. "Sleep now, little wolf," Damon said, and his eyes flashed red once more. "When you wake, we will have much to discuss." The world tilted sideways, and I felt myself falling. Strong arms caught me before I hit the pavement, cradling me against a chest that felt like carved stone. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was his face hovering above mine, beautiful and terrible and somehow familiar, as if I'd been waiting my entire life to meet those crimson eyes. When I woke hours later, I was back in my cottage with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Truck sat in my driveway, the herbs from town carefully arranged on my kitchen counter. For a moment, I wondered if I'd dreamed the entire encounter. Then I caught a scent lingering in the air. Pine and cedar and something darker, something that made my broken wolf stir for the first time since the rejection. And I knew with absolute certainty that Damon Blackthorn was real. And he would be back. The dreams began that very night. I found myself running through moonlit forests, my feet bare against moss-covered earth that should have been cold but felt warm as summer sand. Trees rose around me like cathedral pillars, their branches weaving a canopy so thick that only slivers of silver light pierced through to guide my way. But I wasn't alone. A massive black wolf ran beside me, his silver markings gleaming like liquid mercury in the ethereal light. In the dream, my wolf was alive again, vibrant and strong, her consciousness merged with mine in perfect harmony. We moved as one being, 2 souls sharing the same wild purpose, racing through the endless forest towards something I couldn't name but desperately needed to find. The black wolf's red-flecked eyes met mine, and I felt a connection so profound it stole what breath I had left. This wasn't the tentative bond I'd imagined with Kale, built on pack politics and convenient attraction. This was something primal, ancient, as if our souls had been searching for each other across lifetimes. We ran until the world dissolved into mist and starlight, and I woke with a gasp, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. Taste of night air lingered on my tongue, sweet and clean and impossibly real. I sat up in bed, touching my lips in wonder, and found dirt beneath my fingernails. Rich, dark earth that smelled of deep forest loam and secrets buried in shadow. It was impossible. I'd been asleep in my cottage all night, the doors locked, the windows sealed against the mountain chill. Yet somehow my body bore evidence of a journey I couldn't have taken. The dreams came every night after that, each one more vivid than the last. Sometimes we hunted together, the black wolf and I, chasing phantom prey through landscapes that shifted between familiar pack territory and places I'd never seen. Other times we simply ran, the pure joy of movement and freedom driving us deeper into the wilderness of sleep. But always I woke with dirt under my nails and the taste of wild air in my mouth. By the fourth night, I was afraid to sleep. The dreams felt more real than my waking life, and the growing pile of evidence, small twigs caught in my hair, mud on my feet, scratches from thorns that didn't exist in my garden, suggested something impossible was happening to me. That's when I decided to search for answers in the PAC's archives. The library occupied the basement of the community center, a musty room filled with leather-bound journals and hand-copied texts that documented our history. Most PAC members avoided the place, finding the old stories boring or irrelevant to modern life. But I'd always loved the weight of ancient knowledge, the sense of connection to wolves who had come before. I pulled every book that mentioned bloodlines, genetics, or unusual manifestations of wolf nature. Most contained the standard information I'd learned as a child. Bloodline charts tracing the descent of alphas, records of territorial disputes, accounts of the great hunts that had established our PAC's dominance in these mountains. But buried in a text so old the binding cracked when I opened it, I found a reference that made my blood run cold. Shadow wolves. Passage was brief, almost a footnote, but it described creatures that existed in the spaces between worlds. Neither fully wolf nor fully supernatural, they were said to walk in dreams as easily as in waking life, their consciousness unbound by the normal limitations of physical form. The shadow wolf bloodline was purged from the PACs in 1867, the text read, after the incident at Moonfall Ridge demonstrated their dangerous instability. Those who carried the gene were exiled or executed, their names struck from all records to prevent future contamination of pure wolf lines. 1867. The year my great-great-grandmother had supposedly died in a hunting accident, according to family stories. But what if she hadn't died? What if she'd been exiled, forced to live in exile while pregnant with my great-grandfather? I spent hours searching for more information, but it was as if someone had deliberately scrubbed the records clean. Every reference to shadow wolves was fragmentary, incomplete, leaving me with questions and a growing certainty that my family's history held secrets darker than I'd ever imagined. PAC's elderly historian, Thomas Graybeard, found me there as the sun began to set, surrounded by open books and growing desperation. "Sarah, child, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, settling his arthritic bones into the chair across from me. "What has you so deep in the old stories?" I hesitated, then pushed the ancient text toward him, pointing to the passage about shadow wolves. "Thomas, have you ever heard of this? The purge in 1867? His weathered face went pale, and I saw his hands tremble as he reached for the book. "Where did you find this?" "These texts were supposed to have been destroyed decades ago." "Then it's true?" Shadow wolves existed. Thomas closed the book with a snap that echoed through the silent room. "Some knowledge is buried for good reason, child. The shadow wolf bloodline brought nothing but pain and death to those who carried it. They were abominations, creatures caught between worlds, never truly belonging to either." "But what made them dangerous?" I pressed, thinking of my dreams, my healing wounds, the way my wolf had gone silent. "What happened at Moonfall Ridge?" "A shadow wolf lost control during a PAC gathering," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Her emotions triggered a transformation unlike anything the alphas had ever seen. She became something monstrous, neither wolf nor human but a creature of pure nightmare. By the time they managed to stop her, 17 PAC members were dead. My mouth went dry. "What happened to her?" "They killed her," he said simply. "And then they hunted down every wolf who shared her bloodline, every distant cousin who might carry the gene. It was necessary, Sarah. Some prices are too high to pay for power." That night, I tried to stay awake, terrified of what my dreams might reveal. But exhaustion claimed me despite my fears, and I found myself once again running through moonlit forests with my phantom companion. This time, though, the dream was different. The black wolf led me to a clearing where ancient stones formed a perfect circle, their surfaces carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the circle stood a woman with my face but older, wiser, her eyes blazing with silver fire. "You cannot run from what you are," she said, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. The blood calls to blood, and the shadow stirs whether you will it or not. I don't want this, I said, and my voice sounded strange in the dream, layered with harmonics that spoke of wolf and something else. I just want to be normal. The woman laughed, a sound like wind through autumn leaves. Normal was never your destiny, child. You were born to walk between worlds, to bridge the gap between light and shadow. The question is not whether you will embrace your nature, but whether you will learn to control it before it destroys everything you love. The black wolf padded to my side, his massive head pressing against my hip in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. In the dream, I could feel his thoughts as clearly as my own, a consciousness vast and ancient and patient. "Who are you?" I asked him, though I thought I already knew. His answer came not in words but in images, a flood of memories that weren't mine. A vampire king bound by duty and loneliness, watching from the shadows as generations of my bloodline lived and died in ignorance of their true nature. Waiting for the right combination of trauma and awakening that would finally call forth what had been sleeping in our genes. "Damon," I whispered, and the name felt like a prayer and a curse combined. I woke to find myself standing in my garden, dirt cold beneath my bare feet, the taste of night air sharp in my lungs. But this time I wasn't alone. Red eyes watched me from the tree line, patient and knowing and infinitely dangerous. Damon stepped from the shadows, fully clothed this time in dark jeans and a black coat that made him blend with the darkness like smoke. "The dreams are becoming stronger," he said, and his voice carried the same hypnotic quality I remembered from our encounter on the mountain road. "Soon you won't be able to distinguish between sleeping and waking, between dream and reality." "What's happening to me?" I asked, wrapping my arms around myself against the cold. "Your shadow wolf is awakening," he said, moving closer with that fluid grace that marked him as something more than human. "The trauma of your rejection cracked the barriers your ancestors built to contain their dual nature. Now that power bleeds through in your dreams, testing the boundaries of what's possible." "Thomas told me about the purge," I said. "About what happened at Moonfall Ridge." Damon's expression darkened. "The wolves have always feared what they don't understand. They saw only the destruction, never the potential for creation. Shadow wolves aren't monsters, Sarah. They're bridges between worlds, guardians of the balance between supernatural forces." "But she killed 17 pack members." "She was untrained, unguided, consumed by grief and rage," Damon replied. "Her mate had been killed by vampire hunters, and her wolf sought vengeance without understanding the power it was channeling. With proper instruction, proper control, shadow wolves are protectors, not destroyers." He was close enough now that I could smell his scent, pine and cedar, and something darker that made my skin tingle with awareness. "Is that why you've been watching my bloodline? To find another shadow wolf?" "To find the one foretold in the prophecies," he corrected. "The shadow wolf who would rise not from vengeance but from rejection, who would bridge the worlds not through destruction but through understanding. You, Sarah, are not just any shadow wolf. You are the one the ancient texts spoke of, the key to a new age of balance between our kinds." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. Prophecies, ancient texts, the fate of supernatural races resting on my shoulders. It was too much, too vast for a girl who just wanted her broken heart to heal. "I don't want to be special," I whispered. "I just want to belong somewhere." Damon's hand rose to cup my cheek, his touch cool but somehow comforting. "You will belong, little wolf, but not in the way you imagined. Your place is not among the wolves who cast you out, nor fully in my world of shadows and blood. Your place is between, in the spaces where miracles are born." His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone, and I felt something stir inside me that had nothing to do with my sleeping wolf. This was purely human, the recognition of a soul that called to mine across the vast loneliness of existence. "Come with me tomorrow night," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to vibrate through my bones. "Let me show you what you could become. Let me teach you to control the power that's awakening inside you before it tears you apart." I should have said no. Every instinct bred into me from childhood screamed that vampires were enemies, that trusting him would lead to destruction. But standing there in my garden with moonlight painting silver patterns on his dark hair, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. One night I heard myself say, "Just to understand what's happening to me." Damon smiled, and for the first time since my rejection, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. One night, little wolf, and then we'll see what destiny has in store for us both. I didn't have to wait until the next night. Marcus returned from his training 3 days before I was to meet with Damon, his motorcycle's familiar rumble echoing off the mountain walls like thunder announcing a storm. I was in my herb garden, trying to find peace in the simple rhythm of weeding and watering when he pulled into my driveway. My heart lurched with a mixture of joy and dread as he dismounted, his sandy hair tousled by the wind and his brown eyes bright with the excitement of homecoming. Marcus Stormwind had been my closest friend since childhood, the boy who'd taught me to climb trees and catch fireflies, who'd held me while I cried over scraped knees and broken dreams. Seeing him now, after everything that had changed inside me, I realized how much I'd missed the comfort of uncomplicated friendship. "Sarah." He swept me into a bear hug that lifted my feet from the ground, spinning me around until I laughed despite the weight pressing on my heart. "God, I've missed you." The mountain pack is twice as strict as ours, and their idea of fun is competitive howling contests. But when he set me down, his expression shifted. Those warm brown eyes that had always seen me clearly now studied my face with growing concern. "You look different," he said carefully, his hands still resting on my shoulders. "Pale as moonlight and thin as a reed. And these," his fingers traced the air near my wounded arms without quite touching, "these look infected. Why haven't they healed?" I stepped back from his touch, suddenly aware of how much I must have changed since he'd left. The girl he remembered had been whole, if heartbroken. The woman who stood before him now carried secrets that could get us both killed. "It's been a difficult few months," I said carefully. The rejection hit harder than I expected. Marcus's jaw tightened, and I saw a flash of the warrior he'd become during his time away. "Kale's a fool." I heard about the ceremony, about him choosing that political alliance over what was right in front of him. "It doesn't matter now," I said, though we both knew that was a lie. "Doesn't it?" Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone we'd shared as children. "Because I have something to tell you, something I should have said before I left." My stomach clenched with dread. I could see the truth in his eyes before he spoke, could feel the weight of confession hanging between us like a blade waiting to fall. "I love you, Sarah," he said simply. "I've loved you since we were 15 and you kissed Tommy Redclaw behind the meeting hall just to see what it felt like. I've loved you through every crush, every heartbreak, every moment you spent pining after an alpha who was too blind to see your worth." The words should have been a balm to my wounded heart. Here was someone who'd known me my entire life, who offered the kind of steady, uncomplicated love that could heal old wounds and build a simple, happy future. But instead of joy, I felt only a crushing sense of loss for what might have been. "Marcus," I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I know you don't feel the same way right now," he said. "Your heart is still raw from Kale's rejection. But I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. I'm done pretending I don't want more than friendship." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch, pressing it into my hands with a smile that was both hopeful and terrified. "Open it when you're ready to consider a different kind of future. A future where you're cherished for exactly who you are." Before I could respond, the air around us suddenly grew cold. Shadows lengthened despite the bright morning sun, and I caught the scent of pine and cedar that meant only one thing. Damon materialized from the darkness between the trees, his presence like a storm front rolling across the peaceful morning. He was dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb light, and his red-flecked eyes burned with barely contained fury as they fixed on Marcus. "How touching," Damon said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge I'd learned to recognize. "A declaration of love to a woman who no longer belongs entirely to your world." Marcus spun toward the sound, his body automatically shifting into a defensive crouch. I saw his nostrils flare as he caught Damon's scent, and his face went pale with shock and recognition. "Vampire," he snarled, his human form beginning to shimmer as his wolf pushed toward the surface. "What do you want with Sarah?" "What I want," Damon replied smoothly, moving with that fluid grace that marked him as apex predator, "is to protect what is mine from those too foolish to recognize the danger they court." "Yours!" Marcus's voice cracked with disbelief and growing rage. "Sarah isn't property to be claimed by monsters." Damon's smile was sharp as winter ice. "Isn't she? Tell me, Wolf, what do you know of shadow bloodlines? Of hybrid natures that transcend the simple binaries your kind cling to?" Marcus looked between us, confusion and fear warring in his expression. "What is he talking about, Sarah? What shadow bloodlines?" I opened my mouth to explain, to find some way to bridge the growing chasm between my old life and my emerging reality, but Damon spoke first. "She hasn't told you," he said with cruel satisfaction. "Of course she hasn't. How could she explain that the woman you love is becoming something your pack would execute on sight?" "Stop," I said, my voice carrying a power that surprised all three of us. The shadows around us deepened, responding to my emotional state with an intensity that made Marcus stumble backward. "Sarah," Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with shock. "What's happening to you?" The leather pouch fell from my nerveless fingers as the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. Here were two paths, two futures, two men who offered completely different versions of love and belonging. Marcus represented everything I'd once wanted. Acceptance, normalcy, a place in the world I'd been born to. Damon offered power, purpose, and a love that transcended the boundaries of species and convention. "I'm changing," I said finally, my voice steady despite the chaos in my heart. "Into something that doesn't fit neatly into pack categories." Marcus's face cycled through confusion, fear, and desperate denial before settling into grim determination. "Then we'll figure it out together. We'll find a way to help you to cure whatever's happening." "It's not a disease to be cured," Damon interjected, his tone sharp with irritation. "It's an evolution, an awakening of abilities that make her more than either of our kinds alone." "I don't care what abilities she develops," Marcus shot back, his loyalty fierce and unwavering. "She's still Sarah. She's still Pack. She still belongs with her own kind." "Her own kind cast her out," Damon reminded him coldly. "Her own kind watched her bleed and did nothing to help. I found her broken and alone, rejected by the very people who should have protected her." "Because you were watching her like a predator stalking prey," Marcus snarled, his control beginning to slip. "How long have you been circling her, vampire? How long have you been waiting for the chance to sink your claws into her vulnerability?" The accusation hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Damon had been watching my bloodline for generations, waiting for this exact moment. But his patience felt less like predatory planning and more like the devotion of someone who'd been promised a miracle and refused to stop believing it would come. 5 centuries, Damon said simply. "I've waited 5 centuries for her awakening, and I'll wait 5 more if that's what it takes for her to understand her true potential." Marcus went very still, his warrior training warring with his emotional turmoil. 5 centuries. You're talking about prophecies, aren't you? Ancient magic that treats people like chess pieces in some grand cosmic game. "I'm talking about destiny," Damon corrected. "About a future where shadow wolves no longer have to hide what they are or die for the crime of existing." "And what about what Sarah wants?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising. "What about her right to choose a normal life with someone who loves her for who she is, not what she might become?" Question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Both men turned to look at me, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I could give. Marcus offered love without conditions, acceptance of my broken state, the promise of healing through pure devotion. Damon offered transformation, power, and a love that challenged me to become more than I'd ever imagined possible. "I want," I said slowly, my voice gaining strength as I spoke, to understand what's happening to me before I make any decisions about my future. Then come with me, Marcus said immediately. Leave this place, leave the pack that hurt you. We'll go somewhere new, somewhere you can heal without the pressure of expectations or ancient prophecies. Running won't stop her awakening, Damon warned. It will only make it more dangerous when it finally manifests completely. And staying here won't stop your manipulation, Marcus shot back. You're using her pain against her, making her feel like she has no choice but to embrace whatever darkness you're offering. I'm offering her truth, Damon said, his composure finally cracking to reveal the raw emotion beneath. I'm offering her a chance to become everything she was meant to be instead of settling for the shadows of a life that was never really hers. I'm offering her love, Marcus countered. Real love, not some obsession dressed up as destiny. They faced each other across my garden like gunslingers at high noon, two forces of nature preparing for a conflict that would reshape everything I knew about my world. And I stood between them, feeling the pull of both options like tidal forces threatening to tear me apart. Stop, I said again, this time with enough power behind the word that both men froze mid-motion. Just stop. This isn't about what either of you wants. This is about what I need to survive whatever's happening to me. I looked at Marcus, seeing the boy I'd grown up with overlaid with the man he'd become. Strong, loyal, willing to fight the world for someone he loved. Everything a woman could want in a partner if that woman was still entirely human. Then I looked at Damon, seeing the ancient intelligence in his eyes, the promise of power and purpose that called to something deep in my awakening nature. Everything a shadow wolf might need in an ally, if she was brave enough to embrace what she was becoming. I need time, I said finally. Time to understand what's happening to me without pressure from either of you. Time is a luxury you don't have, Damon said softly. Your awakening is accelerating. Soon you'll have to choose between control and chaos. Then I'll choose when I'm ready, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Not before. Marcus stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine. Sarah, you don't have to face this alone. Whatever's happening, whatever you're becoming, I'll stand by you. His touch was warm and familiar, grounding me in memories of simpler times when our biggest worry was whether we'd get caught sneaking extra dessert from the communal kitchen. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to choose that simplicity, to turn away from prophecies and power in favor of love that asked nothing more than I stay exactly as I was. But then I felt it, the stirring of something wild and ancient in my blood. My shadow wolf, awakening to the presence of both her potential futures. She didn't retreat from Damon's darkness or Marcus's light. Instead, she seemed to evaluate them both with the cool calculation of a predator choosing hunting grounds. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Whatever I was becoming, it was something that transcended the simple choice between vampire and werewolf, between darkness and light. I was becoming something that could bridge those worlds, something that belonged fully to neither and therefore could claim aspects of both. I understand now, I said quietly, and both men tensed at something they heard in my voice. This isn't about choosing between you. This is about choosing who I'm going to become. I looked at the leather pouch Marcus had dropped, then at the shadows that seemed to lean toward Damon like flowers following the sun. Two offers, two paths, two versions of myself stretching out into possible futures. Question wasn't which man I loved more. Question was which version of myself I was brave enough to become. And as the shadows deepened around us and my wounds pulsed with their strange rhythm, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to choose at all. Maybe the real choice was whether I was strong enough to forge a third path, one that honored both my wolf heritage and my emerging vampire nature. One that proved shadow wolves could be bridges between worlds rather than victims of the conflict between them. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after my confrontation with Marcus and Damon, when pack scouts reported strange scents along our territorial borders. Not the familiar musk of neighboring wolves or the sharp tang of mountain predators, but something else. Something that made even our most experienced trackers nervous. Vampires, Alpha Kale announced at the emergency pack meeting, his golden eyes hard with the kind of fury I'd seen him display only once before, the night he'd claimed Lydia as his Luna. Multiple scents, at least 6 distinct individuals, circling our territory like vultures waiting for carrion. I sat in the back row of the meeting hall, my hood pulled low to hide the way my wounds had begun to glow with a faint silver light whenever vampires were mentioned. The shadow wolf inside me stirred restlessly, recognizing kinship with creatures my pack considered mortal enemies. "Have they crossed into our lands?" asked Beta Thompson, his scarred hands clenched into fists that spoke of old battles with the undead. "Not yet," Kale replied, but his tension was palpable. "They're testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. Question is why now? We've had peace with the local covens for over a decade." I knew why, though I couldn't speak the truth aloud. Damon's presence in our territory had drawn attention from other vampires, those who saw opportunity in the chaos surrounding a newly awakened shadow wolf. The knowledge sat in my stomach like a stone, heavy with guilt and growing dread. Marcus, seated near the front with the other warriors, raised his hand. "What are our orders, Alpha?" "Double the patrols," Kale commanded. "No one travels alone, especially near the borders. And if any vampire sets foot on our land, you have permission to kill on sight." Chorus of approving growls rippled through the assembled pack, but I felt only sick fear. If they found Damon, if they discovered our connection, the consequences would be catastrophic for everyone involved. The meeting dispersed with the grim efficiency of a pack preparing for war, but I lingered in the empty hall, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. That's when I caught the scent that made my blood run cold. Pine and cedar, but wrong somehow. Corrupted. Where Damon's presence carried the clean darkness of ancient forests, this smell reeked of decay and something that might have once been sanity. "Little shadow wolf," a voice whispered from the darkness near the hall's rear entrance. "We've been looking for you." 3 figures emerged from the shadows, and my heart nearly stopped. They wore human faces, but their eyes burned with the same crimson fire as Damon's, and their smiles revealed fangs that seemed longer and sharper than they should be. These weren't refined vampires like Damon, creatures of elegant power and careful control. These were something feral, something that had let the beast consume the man. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. The leader, a gaunt man with lank hair and clothes that had seen better decades, tilted his head like a curious predator. "We are the Forsaken, child. Vampires cast out from the great covens for refusing to bow to kings who've grown soft with age and sentiment." "What do you want with me?" "What do you think we want?" Another of them, a woman whose beauty was marred by the madness gleaming in her red eyes, stepped closer. "You're the shadow wolf the prophecies speak of, the bridge between worlds. Your blood holds power that could reshape the balance between our kinds." The third vampire, silent until now, spoke with a voice like grinding bone. "Blackthorn thinks to claim you for his own vision of peace and cooperation. We have different ideas about what you could become." Terror flooded my system as I realized the danger I'd brought to my pack simply by existing. These weren't vampires interested in Damon's grand designs for harmony between species. These were predators who saw me as either a weapon to be wielded or a threat to be eliminated. "I don't want to be part of anyone's plans," I said, backing toward the main doors. "Too late for that, little wolf," the leader said with a laugh that raised every hair on my arms. "The moment your shadow nature awakened, you became a player in this game whether you wished it or not. That's when my abilities manifested without conscious thought or control." The shadows in the hall deepened, responding to my fear and desperation with an intensity that surprised all of us. Darkness poured from the corners like living liquid, wrapping around my attackers with grasping tendrils that felt solid as rope but moved like smoke. The lead vampire snarled in surprise, his form blurring as he tried to escape the shadow bonds. But my power, raw and untrained as it was, held him fast. The others fared no better, their superhuman speed useless against restraints that existed in the space between light and dark. Impossible, the female vampire hissed, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been fear. Shadow wolves don't manifest this level of control without training. This one is different, the third vampire said, his voice tight with strain as he fought against the darkness. The king spoke truly. She is the one from the prophecies. But using so much power so quickly was like drinking from a fire hose. I felt something inside me tear, a fundamental barrier giving way under the pressure of abilities I didn't understand. Pain lanced through my chest and I tasted copper in my mouth. The shadow bonds flickered and began to weaken. That's when the meeting hall doors burst open, and Marcus charged in with 3 other pack warriors at his back. They took in the scene, 3 vampires trapped in impossible darkness while I stood in the center bleeding from wounds that had opened across my arms and face. "Sarah!" Marcus shouted, shifting mid-run into his wolf form, a blur of brown fur and righteous fury. The other warriors followed suit, their transformations filling the hall with the sounds of cracking bones and tearing cloth. But they were facing vampires, creatures whose speed and strength could match any werewolf. My shadow bonds snapped under the strain of maintaining them while injured, freeing the Forsaken just as the pack attack reached them. The hall erupted into chaos, tooth and claw against supernatural speed and inhuman strength. Marcus lunged at the leader, his jaws seeking the vampire's throat, but the creature moved like liquid shadow, flowing around the attack and raking claws across Marcus's ribs. Blood sprayed across the wooden floor, bright red against weathered planks. I tried to help, to summon more shadows or find some way to tip the battle in our favor, but my untrained abilities rebelled against me. Instead of controlled darkness, I produced bursts of silver fire that seared vampire and werewolf alike, forcing me to watch helplessly as my friends fought for their lives. The female vampire had cornered young Peter Moonbrook, barely 18 and on his first warrior patrol. Her fangs gleamed as she prepared to tear out his throat, and I knew with sick certainty that I was about to watch someone die because of my very existence. That's when Damon arrived. He didn't enter through the doors like a normal person. Instead, he seemed to condense from the shadows themselves, materializing between the female vampire and her intended victim with murderous grace. His hand closed around her throat before she could react, lifting her off the ground with casual strength. "Elena Ravencrest," he said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries. "Still playing with your food instead of eating it efficiently." "Blackthorn," she gasped, her legs kicking uselessly in the air. "We claim salvage rights. The Shadow Wolf is unprotected, unclaimed." "The Shadow Wolf," Damon replied with deadly calm, "is under my protection. As are these wolves by extension of that protection." The leader of the Forsaken had disengaged from his battle with Marcus, recognizing the shift in power dynamics. "You would defend werewolves, Vampire King? Your own kind will see this as weakness." "My own kind," Damon said, his grip tightening until Elena's struggles became more desperate, "will see this as exactly what it is. A demonstration that I will tolerate no interference with my plans." With a sound like breaking branches, he snapped the female vampire's neck. She crumbled to dust in his hands, her centuries of existence ending in a whisper of wind and regret. The remaining 2 Forsaken exchanged glances heavy with calculation and growing fear. They were outnumbered now, facing not just pack warriors but a vampire king whose power dwarfed their own. "This isn't over," the leader said, his form already beginning to blur as he prepared to flee. "Others will come. The Shadow Wolf's awakening has sent ripples through every supernatural community from here to the Atlantic. You cannot protect her from all of us." "Watch me," Damon replied, but the Forsaken were already gone, vanishing into the mountain night like smoke on the wind. The silence that followed was heavy with unasked questions and dawning comprehension. Marcus, still in wolf form but bleeding from multiple wounds, shifted back to human and fixed Damon with a stare that could have melted steel. "You," he said, his voice raw with pain and fury. "This is because of you. They came here because of whatever you're doing to Sarah. They came here because she exists, Damon corrected, moving to where I stood swaying on my feet, my shadow wolf abilities having drained more energy than I possessed. Whether I was involved or not, her awakening would have drawn attention from those who see opportunity in chaos. He's right, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. This is my fault. My existence is putting everyone in danger. Sarah, no. Marcus started toward me, but Damon was already there, his cold hands supporting me as my legs gave out. Your existence, Damon said firmly, is not a fault to be corrected. It's a gift to be protected and nurtured. Tell that to the vampires who want to use me as a weapon, I said bitterly. Or the pack members who will want me exiled when they learn what I am. Then perhaps, Damon said softly, it's time to stop hiding what you are and start embracing it. Marcus moved closer despite his injuries, his brown eyes blazing with protective fury. She doesn't need to embrace anything. She needs to be kept safe from monsters like those three and like you. I am nothing like the Forsaken, Damon said, his voice carrying a warning that made the air itself seem to vibrate with danger. Aren't you? Marcus challenged. You're all vampires. You're all predators who see her as something to be claimed and used. Temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees, frost forming on the windows as Damon's control slipped just enough to reveal the ancient power lurking beneath his civilized facade. I see her, he said with lethal quiet, as the key to ending centuries of bloodshed between our kinds. I see her as the fulfillment of prophecies that have guided my existence for 500 years. I see her as the most precious thing in a world that has forgotten the meaning of hope. You see her as an obsession, Marcus shot back, unintimidated by the supernatural cold. You're using her pain, her rejection, her vulnerability to make her dependent on your protection. Before Damon could respond, the hall doors opened again, and Alpha Kale strode in with a full complement of pack warriors at his back. They took in the scene, the lingering scent of vampire violence, the frost coating the windows, and me standing between two supernatural forces like a prize to be won. Explain, Kale commanded, his alpha voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Now. And I realized that the time for secrets and half-truths was over. The battle with the Forsaken had revealed too much, shown abilities that no normal werewolf possessed. Pack would demand answers, and those answers would change everything. I'm a shadow wolf, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. A hybrid of werewolf and vampire bloodlines, awakened by the trauma of rejection. Gasps echoed from the assembled warriors, followed by the distinctive sound of weapons being drawn. Silver blades and wooden stakes, the traditional tools for destroying supernatural threats. That's impossible, Kale said, but his voice carried doubt rather than certainty. Shadow wolves are extinct. They were purged generations ago. Not extinct, Damon said, moving protectively closer to me. Hidden. Suppressed. Waiting for the right moment to emerge and fulfill their true purpose. Which is? Kale demanded. To bridge the gap between our kinds, I said, finding strength in finally speaking the truth aloud. To prove that vampire and werewolf natures can coexist in harmony rather than eternal conflict. Or to destroy both races from within, snarled Beta Thompson, his silver blade catching the hall's dim lighting. Shadow wolves are abominations, cursed creatures that should never have been allowed to exist. I'm not cursed, I said, my shadow abilities stirring in response to the threat. I'm different. And that difference could be the key to peace between our kinds. The only peace, Thompson said, raising his weapon, comes from eliminating threats to pack purity. That's when Marcus stepped between us, his wounded body positioning itself as a shield despite the cost in pain and blood. You'll have to go through me first, he said quietly. Whatever she is, whatever she's becoming, she's still Sarah. She's still one of us. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, pack loyalty warring with supernatural fear, love battling against prejudice and ancient hatred. And in the center of it all, I stood as the living symbol of everything that could go right or catastrophically wrong between two species that had spent centuries trying to destroy each other. The choice was no longer just about my personal future. It was about the future of every supernatural being who dreamed of a world where ancient hatreds could finally be laid to rest. Question was whether any of us would survive long enough to see that future born.